Hello and welcome everybody. Thank you so much for being here today for our webinar, Building Trauma-Sensitive Schools by Helping Students Get Regulated, presented by Jen Alexander. My name is Sharon Larkin. I'm a Senior Marketing Manager at Brooks Publishing, who is our sponsor for today's webinar. Also, if you're not already a member of our community, Teaching All Students, we would love for you to join. This is a place where you can find great webinars like the one you're going to see today, as well as other resources and special offers from Brooks Publishing. So if you'd like to join, just go to www.edweb.net/inclusive education. We are offering a special discount for all viewers today. To save 20% at Brooks Publishing, just use code EDWEBJA. That discount code is good until April 30th, and just use it at brookspublishing.com. And finally, we're doing a special giveaway today. 3 lucky winners are going to get a copy of Jen Alexander's new book, Building Trauma-Sensitive Schools. I will be selecting the 3 winners at random. So if you want to enter, just be sure to comment in the chat. That's what enters you to win. So without any more delay, I'm extremely happy to welcome our presenter today, Jen Alexander. Jen is an educator with more than 15 years of experience as a special education teacher and is currently a school counselor in Iowa. She holds degrees in psychology and special education, as well as a master's degree in professional school counseling from the University of Northern Iowa. In addition, she is a nationally certified counselor and a registered school-based play therapist. Jen, welcome, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Sharon. I am so excited to be doing my first ever webinar today with all of you. We're going to talk about one part of building a trauma-sensitive school, which is how to help students get regulated. And the great news about focusing on regulation is that it will help our students who have experienced childhood trauma, but it will also help other students who haven't experienced trauma who may be having difficulties with regulation, whether that's due to typical developmental issues or other issues that they might be dealing with in their life. So we're going to go ahead and get started with that. Thank you so much for everyone who's joining us today. We're going to have some fun, and you're also going to walk away with the know-how of how to use a tool from the book that you can start using right away with kids. So to help us get started, I like to tailor what we do to you, so it would help me to know what age of students you primarily work with. So we're going to go ahead and start the poll right now with EdWeb, and that will give us some information that will help me know how many of you are working with preschoolers, how many of you are working with elementary age, how many are primarily focused on middle school. I bow down to you, by the way, if you're a middle school educator, and how many of you are high school folks. I actually have experience at all of those levels, although most of my experience is at the elementary level. And it looks like, so far, the majority of you are at elementary level as well, but we have folks from all ranges. So I'll be sure to try to throw in some examples that will apply to everybody. Thanks so much for that. It's still going up, so we'll wait just a little bit here while you're getting that in there. Okay, I think we're ready to roll. Let's start out by talking just a little bit about trauma. I'm not going to go into a lot of details about trauma in this webinar because I really want to get to the how do we help kids regulate, but I do want to give a little brief information about trauma. So I have pulled from really the gurus in the world of trauma, in the world of neurobiology, to put together this definition that I used in my book for trauma, and here's what I came up with. Trauma is a distressing experience or set of experiences that threatens a person's actual safety or perceived sense of felt safety to such a degree that it exceeds an individual's capacity to cope in healthy ways. And I want to break that down a little bit for you. So trauma is a distressing experience. Obviously, it's something that, whether it's a child or an adult who's experiencing it, they don't like it. It's distressing. It's bothersome in some ways. And it's bothersome and upsetting to a degree that it threatens a person's actual safety or perceived sense of felt safety. And that means it's some kind of a terrifying experience that probably leaves the person feeling helpless, as Dr. Bruce Perry would talk about. And when we're talking about the difference between an actual threat to safety and a perceived threat to safety. What we mean by that is that the person's actual life could be in danger. So if they're experiencing neighborhood violence or domestic violence of some kind, their safety could actually be threatened in a real way. A perceived threat to safety is more about emotional safety. So if we think about children, young children in particular, they're dependent on their caregivers to meet all of their needs. They're not able to be independent and take care of themselves. And so when those relationships are threatened in some way, whether that's from an outside force or within the relationships themselves, that can threaten a child's feeling of safety. So maybe consider a highly conflicted divorce situation and how that might have children within that family system feeling unsafe, even though their physical safety isn't actually threatened. Those kinds of issues and difficulties can be traumatic for kids. It doesn't mean they absolutely are, but they can be. And part of the way that we determine if it is traumatic is whether or not that event or series of events overwhelms the person's ability to cope in healthy ways. So it's either the actual traumatic event or events are so overwhelming in themselves that the person can't cope, or it could be that the individual has some difficulties with coping for whatever reason, and therefore they're easily pushed into that overwhelming state. And it can also reach a point of trauma when a child doesn't have access to the support that are needed to help restore safety and provide a sense of comfort and healing after a highly stressful or traumatic event. So if we have a situation where a child or teen is lacking the social support and the responsive relationships that are necessary to help that child heal, then the event can be traumatic as well. Lots of things can create trauma for children. It could relate to child abuse, neglect, domestic violence. And when we're talking about abuse, we're talking about physical or sexual abuse or emotional abuse. But there are things like medical trauma or natural disasters or war or poverty, and most definitely separating children from their parents. All kinds of issues like that can also be traumatic. And what we know is that when we're looking at how trauma impacts students at school, that at least 1 in 4 students in every single classroom every day have had their school success negatively impacted by trauma. 1 in 4. That means we have masses of kids in every school across the country who need our help in terms of providing the support that's necessary to help them recover from traumatic events, but also to help them move forward in their development when trauma may impact how the brain and body develop and then function. And that's really how we get to talking about this idea of regulation, which is what I want to move into next. So kids who have experienced highly stressful and or traumatic events have experienced what we call a high degree of dysregulation in their bodies. And when that trauma is ongoing, that dysregulation is ongoing as well. And that can end up changing and impacting how the child's brain and body develop, which then later impacts functioning in the future as well, even if those traumatic events stop. So when we're looking at students who may be in school, whether they're currently experiencing traumas, in real life right now or not, they still may be impacted by past traumas in terms of their feelings of safety, in terms of their relationships and how they also view themselves, but especially in terms of their ability to regulate. And what we can often see is that kids who have been traumatized feel too much. That's one thing that can happen. They feel too much. Think of it as in the stress response system in the body, the gas pedal is pushed on repeatedly and it has trouble being shut off. So we might see, because of that dysregulation by feeling too much, we might see fight, flight, or freeze reactions. So you can look there at the slide to see what some of those things look like. And if I could see you nod your heads, which I can't really do on the webinar, but if I were to ask you, do you see that in your classrooms, in your schools? Do you see students who have difficulty concentrating, who may be hyperactive, angry, irritable, aggressive? Or do you see kids who are withdrawn, terrified, may run away or hide? Or do you see kids who might freeze? They have a high degree of of dysregulation happening, but they might be stilled, almost that deer in the headlights kind of look. And when that happens, they can even be overly compliant as well. And I see from the comments that a lot of you are saying, yes, yes, very much so. We see students in our schools who have these difficulties, and that's linked to dysregulation. We can also have students who have been traumatized or who haven't been traumatized too, who experience dysregulation in an opposite kind of way. So there's still big energy happening in the body, but instead of pushing on the gas pedal, the body is pushing on the brakes. So you can think of it as lots of energy, lots of force going into the brake pedal, which is causing dysregulation in the body. But we see an opposite kind of effect. So we might see kids who shut down, who feel tired or numb, or if it's happening in an ongoing way, they may show signs of depression. And feelings of helplessness or hopelessness can really be a part of this feeling not enough. The other thing that we know is when any of us are dysregulated by stress or trauma, and we're either feeling too much or not enough, we have difficulty connecting with other people in positive, healthy ways. And for those kids who have been traumatized who may show dysregulation in this way, they may even do what's called dissociation, meaning they stare off into space, they shut down, and that's something that happens to survivors during a traumatic event as the body's really kind of last-ditch way of shutting down and trying to deal with the overwhelming emotion and the overwhelming energy in the body when they can't escape, when they can't run, when they can't hide, when they can't fight, that they shut down and they even separate from their bodies and they don't feel anything. So there's still high dysregulation happening in the body, but they've separated from their body in a sense so that they don't feel it. And that's the only way that they're able to deal with that event that they can't make stop. And when people have problems with dissociation, we may see memory difficulties or even personality changes that can happen too. And keep in mind that a particular individual can struggle with dysregulation in different ways. So at one point you might see feeling too much, and another point you might see feeling not enough, and you might see changes going back and forth between them as well. So I'm just really curious, how many of you have seen some of this not enough kind of response in some of the kids that you work with? Yes, a lot of you are saying often, yes, or a little bit, or always, yes, you're seeing it. So we know that we have kids in our schools who are dysregulated by feeling too much and not enough. And if we want to help kids learn, which is our ultimate goal, we have to help kids be in a just right regulated state. So not feeling too much, not feeling not enough, but feeling just right. And by feeling, I'm talking about arousal within the body. So we need a just right amount of energy and alertness to be able to focus and think and plan and learn. And when we're in that just right state, any of us are going to feel safe, relaxed, in our comfort zone. And you're right, it absolutely relates to Goldilocks. We want to feel not too much, not enough, but just right. And in that just right state, we're calm in our body, we're alert in our processing state, in our body and our mind. We're able to control our actions. We're able to connect with others in positive ways. We're able to have empathy, show compassion, and be flexible in our thinking. And ultimately, we are ready to focus, think, plan, and learn. So as we're thinking about education, if we want kids to learn and we want high academic achievement, we have to ensure that kids are entering a just right arousal state in our classrooms, or learning is a can't, not a won't, as Dr. Daniel Siegel would explain. And for that reason right there, for all of us who care about academic achievement and understand the importance of regulation, it means that we have to figure out how to help kids get regulated in our schools. And that means we have to teach regulation, but it means we have to teach for and coach regulation in the moment, day by day, because we all have changing arousal states throughout the day. And for students who've experienced trauma, they're much more apt to enter a dysregulated state, and we have to be ready as helpers to help them get regulated, and then also be ready in terms of curriculum and RTI informed instruction to be able to meet their needs, to teach them eventually how to self-regulate, whether they need tier 1 supports, tier 2, or tier 3. And that's one of the ways that trauma-sensitive education is really going to help all kids, because all kids need help learning to regulate, but not all kids need as much support as what some of our traumatized students may need, or what some of our other students who struggle with dysregulation, whether it's linked to trauma or not. It could be linked to another mental health issue, or it could be linked to other biological, developmental kinds of things happening within the person too. We have to be able to help kids get regulated to be able to learn. So what I want to do today is teach you about a tool from the book that will help you help kids get regulated within that RTI framework. So let's get started on that. As I mentioned, trauma-sensitive schools focus on regulation, but they actually focus on helping students build 4 essentials, and getting regulated is one of them. We need to help students feel safe, be connected, get regulated, and learn. And today we're really going to focus on this get regulated piece. And what I want to teach you about is what I call the river of feelings in the book. This is a visual that I created and put a metaphor with it to help kids learn about regulation in the first place, and then to be able to have a curriculum piece that you can teach kids, and then a visual that you can use in moment by moment times with kids to help them identify how they're doing with regulation, and then what tools they may need to help them get regulated. And so what I'm going to do now is teach you this tool just like I would teach it to kids. And when you experience that, I think it will help you be ready to use this with your own youth that you work with. So what I'm going to do is talk first about feelings that are too much. So if we think about a river, there's lots of different ways that a river can look. We can have a river that looks just like this picture. And so what I'd like you to do is look at that and think about, what do you see in the picture? And if you could post some comments, that would be great. I'm going to be watching here to see what you're coming up with. So we're talking about a river inside of ourselves, but we're comparing it to a river that's on the earth, okay? So look just at the picture. What do you see? It looks stressful, large waves, it's turbulent, it looks uncomfortable, there's a struggle, needing help, it looks scary, the rapids are out of control, it's wild, it's challenging, there's a lot coming at you. Overwhelming, absolutely. Panic could happen. Focusing on survival, absolutely. It would take so much focus. You need safeguards like a helmet. You need protection to stay safe. It could be exciting or it could be overwhelming. You could need help and you need safety. So if we think about this kid, is this kid really able to focus on a humorous conversation with a friend right now? Probably not. Is this kid in this moment on this boat able to learn algebra right now? Probably not. The student is focused on surviving, focused on getting through these rapids and this overwhelmingness that's coming at him or her. And that's what happens when any of us feel too much inside. So if we have a big stress happening, or we don't have the support that we need to handle maybe a series of little stresses that are building up, we can feel too much inside too. And those ways that you just described what this image looked like are exactly how kids and adults describe feelings of having too much inside, what we call hyperarousal in the field of neurobiology. That's what it's like. And it's very difficult to focus. It's very difficult to learn. It's difficult to connect with others, be creative, be flexible, because you're focused on just managing this overwhelming arousal because it's too much. And I'm sure a lot of you can think of a time when you felt that way. I know I sure can. I'm going to switch now and look at the next slide. We're going to switch to the opposite end of dysregulation now. This is when kids are feeling not enough. So it's that braking system has happened, and the neurobiological word for it is hypo-arousal with an O instead of hyperarousal. So this is when the river is having the river inside of us, the river of feelings. And by feelings, I don't only mean emotions. I mean arousal within the body. I mean energy. So when the river is shut down to the point where we're not feeling enough. So let's just look at the photo first. What do you see there? And this is what you would do with kids. You could show them this picture and say, if we compare this to the river of feelings inside of ourselves, what do we notice here? It's empty, it's deserted, it's abandoned, so we're not connecting with others. It's dry. I don't know what to do. I feel stuck. I feel empty, isolated. alone, lonely, helpless, lost, depression, absolutely, stagnant, yes, stuck, very much so, alone, boring, yes, that blah feeling that kids describe, everything's boring, I can't get engaged. That can definitely go with having just not enough arousal in the body, not enough feeling. You may feel like nobody cares, and hopelessness can set in. It's very hard to move forward. It's very hard to participate in the river of life, whether that's relationships, creativity, learning, just enjoying oneself when you're not feeling enough. And this can happen to all of us, and it can happen repeatedly and in a patterned way for kids who have experienced trauma. And again, we might see sometimes that traumatized students are feeling too much, other times they're feeling not enough. They can go back and forth, and they can even jump arousal states, even though in a healthy, robust stress response system, we would have people who are able to shift arousal states. So there's nothing wrong with feeling too much. Let's go back to that slide a minute. There's nothing wrong with feeling too much when we have a stressor happening. We need more energy in our body. We need to be able to navigate that. But what happens if it becomes too much, then our functioning is going to be affected, and we're going to have energy depletion in our body, which is part of what can impact some of the health effects that go with high numbers of adverse childhood experiences in youth, or what could be potential traumas for youth. Again, we also need to be able to go into arousal states of not enough. That's healthy too. When we go to sleep at night, we're in a not enough state, and that can be energizing for the body. But when we're awake, what we really need to do is spend most of our time in a just right state. And that's what we're going to look at right now. So we elevate arousal, we push on the gas when we need it, and then we're able to calm ourselves back down to a regulated state. Or we're becoming a little overwhelmed and we shut down into a not enough state a little bit to regain energy, and then we are able to shift back up and shift smoothly into a regulated state where we feel just right. So let's look at this in terms of a river. What do you see here in this picture? Excitement, joyful, moving forward. The kids are connected, they're in sync, they're peaceful, they're happy, they're smiling, it's smooth sailing. They're goal-oriented, absolutely. It's balanced, it's fun, it's sunny. They feel in control. It can be tranquil, enjoying, and they're looking to the future. They feel supported. Teamwork can happen. We can be flexible and work together. There's power here, a sense of empowerment, and we're in control of the boat, and we're able to move forward. We're able to connect with others. We're able to feel safe and calm and comfortable, and we're able to learn and be creative. This is also where a growth mindset can come into play. So often we think of our mindset as affecting our emotions, which absolutely can happen, but our arousal state actually affects our mindset as well. And it's much easier to have a growth mindset where we're in this just right state of regulation. So what I do is I teach kids about the river of feelings using these pictures. And to introduce it, what I have kids do is, before I even talk about the river of feelings as my visual, I ask kids to just draw a picture of their river of feelings, just to think about how would they imagine their river. And in the back of the book, in the appendix, there's a script that you can use to help kids imagine that. And you will be amazed at what they come up with when they describe their own rivers. And then after they do that, in the next lesson, I like to introduce these pictures. In fact, I've done that for the very first time this year with kids after developing all of this previously. And it's just been really knocking my socks off to see how kids can make the connection between their own perceptions of their own river of feelings and then looking at the visual that I give them with these pictures and identifying kind of those descriptors that go with too much, not enough, and just right. And once we have that down, I introduce kids to the entire visual. It comes next. So this visual is in the book. There's a little bit different version that's online at Brooks that you can download as well. And there's also a blank one online at Brooks that you can download, which is what I used here. And then I colored it and had in a way that was working for me with kids. And I've actually done it in lots of different ways, and I'm kind of playing around with what works best. And I'll be curious to see what works best for you too. So this visual is in the book, and it was created based on my ideas with some input with some of my past interns and other helpers that I've worked with and learned from over the years. But this is an image that I had in my mind, and my illustrator, Carol Hinrichs, helped me bring this to life. So we can think of this as kind of the continuum of arousal on the river of feelings. And up at the top, we have what I call the red zone, where we can describe ourselves as feeling too much. And you can see that the boats are crashing, they're overwhelmed, they're not in control. The person is likely not feeling safe and may not be acting in safe ways either. They could be terrified, they could be in a rage, showing that fight, flight, freeze response. It's difficult to be safe, and it's an area where learning is a can't, not a won't. Okay. Then if we go down to the bottom part, we can see that the river narrows, and it's in what I call the blue zone. And this is where individuals are feeling not enough. So it's that shutdown where people are not feeling anything. They might be helpless, definitely disconnected. And at its most extreme, a person can faint within the deep blue zone. Then in the middle, we have what I call the green zone, the just right. And again, with these zones, we're not talking about just emotions that kids and adults are feeling, but we're talking about the arousal in the body, the amount of energy that's happening. So what I don't want you to do is say the red zone is anger or the blue zone is sad, because the deep blue zone is really marked by no feelings at all. And a high intense red zone, too much zone, could be fear, it could be rage, it can be different things. So we don't want to label it with a particular feeling. In the just right zone, we can talk about how we're feeling safe, calm, we're able to focus, we're in control, we're ready to think, plan, and learn. And as teachers, that's where we need to be at our best for kids. And it's where our learners need to be so they're ready to learn. But it's also where we all need to be able to connect with each other, to problem solve together, to be flexible and demonstrate compassion, and just to overall be connected. We need to be in that green zone, or at least close to it. So then in the river, I added a couple of zones in between there. So we have the pink zone that is in between the green and the red zone. So this is where we're starting to feel too much, but we're not overwhelmed yet. But we might have bigger energy in the body, bigger feelings are coming up. And those are the words I use with kids, big feelings. I use those words with little ones, and I use those words with big kids too. Kids can identify with having big feelings inside. And instead of identifying it as one set feeling, often it's just a mix of distress. And we can start to pull that apart with kids and identify that. But in the early stages of working with traumatized kids, we're mostly going to focus on big feelings, not enough feelings, too much feelings, or just right. And then we can start to pull it apart over time. Then in that in-between stage towards the bottom, we have the light blue zone. That's what I call it, where we're starting to shut down, not feel as much, might feel numb, might feel withdrawn, pulling away a little bit. And it's hard to think, plan, and learn here too, but it's not as difficult as if you're in that dark blue zone. The great thing about this is that this helps kids name what's going on in their bodies, but it helps us as adults too. And if we're really going to think about building trauma-sensitive schools that help both adults and kids feel safe, connected, regulated, so that learning can occur, we not only have to be helping kids with their arousal, but we have to be identifying our own states of arousal and then working on helping ourselves do what I call go green. So help ourselves, help our colleagues, help our teams, help our families, and help our kids get to the green zone as often as possible so that learning is possible and so that health is maximized. Because the more time we spend in the green zone when we're awake, the healthier we're going to be. Because that red zone and that blue zone expend a great deal of energy if people are in those states for a long period of time when they're awake. We want to avoid that because that has health ramifications, but it also has academic ramifications that we want to avoid as well, because we want to help all kids be successful. All right, so what do you think? Just see a few comments here. I hadn't really looked much as I was talking. Looks like you're thinking that this can work with kids. I agree. I'm seeing it be successful now that I've started using it with kids myself. So once kids have had this instruction, and again, we can do this with all kids, big kids, little kids. Start by talking about too much, just right, not enough. Then introduce the images from the actual river, then introduce this visual. And then eventually we can have kids identifying their color and their number and what will help them go green. So we have to do that in an instructional, practiced way first. But then once we've done that, we can then use it in a moment by moment, day by day setting with kids to say, what's your color? What's your number? One thing I want to point out is that the 0 to 5 range covers the green zone. Then we go up from 5 all the way to 10 in the pink and red, and we go up from 5 to 10 in the blue. On purpose, I did not use negative numbers for a couple of reasons. I want us to be able to use this with young kids who may not understand negative numbers, but I wanted to stay away from the idea of positive versus negative, which could contribute to some misconceptions. And I wanted to stay away from thinking of hyperarousal as big and hypoarousal as small, because actually the dysregulation at a red 10 is big, and the dysregulation at a blue 10 is big. It's just a matter of whether that high energy is going on the gas pedal or going on the brakes, but it's still big energy. It's still big dysregulation. And that's why on purpose, I made sure that the numbers are a 10 on each end. And there are some other people in the field who have kind of created their own visuals and are using those same numbers, and in some cases the same colors, in some cases different colors. But what I think makes the river different is that it has a metaphor embedded in it, which makes sense to kids and to adults. And it also is really linked with the research on neurobiology of what's happening in the stress response system on the biological, physiological level, not just the emotional level. So we're talking about energy, not just emotions. And I think that's key, because we've got kids who have been traumatized, who are feeling really just a flood of stuff inside. And for us to ask them, what emotion do you feel? They don't know, and they're so overwhelmed and may lack language to be able to describe it. But if you can say, are you feeling too much right now or not enough? They oftentimes can identify that, and then we can expand their understanding and their vocabulary and the language that they put to it with the visual itself. And as Daniel Siegel would say, when we can name something, we're beginning to tame it. And so that's part of what this visual is doing. And I've been really excited to see, now that I've finally been using it with kids, I'm really excited to see how it works. I just happened to see a question pop up about zones of regulation, and some of you may be familiar with that. I actually have never used zones of regulation. I'm not trained in that, but the little bit that I do know is that it talks a lot about emotional vocabulary. And again, one of the things that makes my visual different is we're talking about the neurobiological, physiological things that are happening in the body. So when we're talking about red zone, I'm asking kids to think about, is your heart beating fast? How does your tummy feel? How does your hands feel? Are they sweaty? Are you feeling your muscles tighten up? We're really talking about the physical signs that kids are feeling and helping them identify and tap into that. And in the back of the book, there's an activity and some tools that you can use to help kids think about those physiological responses, because some traumatized kids anyway will have trouble coming up with those on their own. And so there's another activity back there that you can use to help them identify that. And I'm planning to do that with younger kids before introducing them to the river, because so they'll have some of that connection to their own responses already. All right, so let's talk just a little bit then about how do we utilize the river of feelings within trauma-informed RTI? And so here's just some basic ideas, and I think you're going to have a lot more ideas yourselves about how to do this and how to incorporate it. And that's part of what I'm super excited about is to have you as educators start using this and let me know what's working, what's not. Let's work together. How can we expand on this? What are the other things we can create together that will help us help kids? Because we're really in the beginning stages of this movement, and that's really what it's about, working together here. So trauma-informed RTI, What this means is that we're going to use the RTI framework in building a trauma-sensitive school, and we're going to use it to help us help kids feel safe, be connected, get regulated, and then learn. All right, so I'm going to focus on this get regulated piece. So we want to look at what are we doing for all kids to help build regulation. Can we teach all kids the river of feelings and use the activities that go with it and help all kids identify their color and their number and build a set of strategies that they can choose from to help them get regulated that work for them, because different things work for different people? Absolutely, we can do that with all kids, and we're going to meet approximately 80% of our students' needs, if we look at our whole school, through that Tier 1 core instruction. So instruction that all kids get, curriculum that's there for everyone, and that we ensure that kids master those essential learnings. Some kids, which may include kids who have been traumatized, it may include kids who haven't been traumatized but are experiencing stress, or kids who have other mental health concerns, or who just struggle for developmental reasons or other biological reasons to struggle with regulation. They may need Tier 2 supports in addition to Tier 1. So we might look at some small group intervention or counseling that we do for some students who are identified in the gen ed setting who need more than core alone. So what can that look like? Well, as part of helping kids get regulated, hopefully we're building in mindfulness kinds of activities in a trauma-sensitive, trauma-informed way, recognizing that all mindful activities might not be appropriate. In particular, having students close their eyes can be difficult for some students who've experienced trauma. So I don't have time to go into all that today, but we want to be doing trauma-sensitive, mindful kinds of activities. Anything that builds in rhythm, regulation, brain breaks, things that are building in music and art and writing and reflection and obviously movement, exercise. We want to be building that into the day for all kids as part of Tier 1. But then when it comes to Tier 2 and supplemental instruction, not only can we be having kids identify their color and number more often during the day, but we can build in more of those regulation activities into the routine of their day. So not waiting for kids to get to a 10 red or even a 9 red before we think about a break, but how do we build in regulation, a rhythm and a routine of regulation in the day before kids get to the too much or not enough state? Because the more we can help kids have their arousal go up a little bit and then shift back down and then back up a little bit and shift back down to green and up and down, the more robust the stress system is going to become, the more able the person is to increase and decrease without going into those jumps into the red or the deep blue zone. So we want to build that in, and we might need to do that more frequently for students who've experienced trauma or who need Tier 2 supports for whatever reason. Obviously, we need to do that for all kids to some degree in Tier 1, but some kids are going to need more, and that's what Tier 2 really is about. Then we have other traumatized students who are going to need Tier 3, and that looks like an individualized program where we're keeping perhaps their world smaller, more adult connection. Maybe they have even a one-on-one if needed, who hopefully as often as possible can be a consistent person or a couple of consistent people. Because what we know is that if you think of young children, how do we help little kids regulate? How do we help babies regulate? It's through our relationship with them, and that's called co-regulation. So when a baby cries, we don't offer them a sticker. We don't suggest a consequence. We pick them up, we pat them, we rock them, we sing, we bring movement and regulation within our relationship, and we help them regulate. And even though in our schools, we have older kids, bigger kids, developmentally, because of the way their brains and bodies have developed as a result of trauma and or neglect that they've experienced, we have babies in bigger bodies. So we have stress response systems that need the same kinds of things that very young children need to be able to develop, and that's through the relationship. So when we make a student's world smaller and we give them more access to trusted adults who can help them and coach them, then we're setting them up for success, and those individualized programs offer that. It may be a smaller class setting, it may be just more access, more frequent access, or closer access to the proximity of trusted adults who can provide that co-regulation. But then we may need, and will need, obviously at Tier 3, more instruction and programming in place that helps teach for regulation and helps coach for regulation as well in an individualized way. Okay. that's a nutshell of that. The book goes into a lot more details about how that can look and strategies that you can use and resources that are available. But what I really wanted to do today was focus on how do I give you this one tool that you can walk out and start using right now, and then how does that fit within the trauma-informed RTI. The other thing I want to show you, I told you that I have started using this with kids for the first time this year. And one of the things I did, because kids have been so excited about it, is I created a wall display where we made our own river of feelings. And I put fabric up there to show the different zones, and then use some of the wording that we've all been talking about here today up on the wall. And one of the things I'm going to do later, it may not be today, but later this week, hopefully, is on my Facebook group, I'm going to put a document that has all these words in it. So, and for free. So if that's something that you would like to do to create your own visual, you certainly could do that. And you could modify the words to words that might work better for you too. But then over on the side, one thing I want to point out is that I did put the ask yourself questions up there. So asking kids, what's your color? What's your number? How can you go green? So when we talk about that, we're talking about in a preventive way, like what are your tools that can help you go green when you need it, but also in the moment when I see you dysregulating, what can help you go green? And sometimes that means we have to suggest things to kids, or we have to have a nonverbal kind of menu for kids to choose from, or other prompts. But then hopefully eventually kids are utilizing those strategies when they need them independently as well. And that's really where self-regulation starts to take off. But it's a process, and we have to take it one step at a time, just like we do with instruction in any other area in our schools. All right. I would be irresponsible if I did not talk just a little bit about self-care with you today, because just like our kids have a river of feelings, so do we as educators. And the more I train educators across the country, the more I talk with educators and work with you, along with my own colleagues and myself in the day-to-day of being an educator myself, I know that we are each stressed. And sometimes it's very hard for us to be in our green zones with kids. And we're not going to be able to help kids regulate if we're not able to go green ourselves. And I think that that's going to entail several different levels of things that we need to work on together as educators. And there's no Band-Aid quick fix. In my opinion, self-care starts with what do we need to do as a system to give each other the support that we need to really be able to help kids, so that we're feeling safe, we're feeling regulated, we're feeling connected in our schools together, so that, and we feel like what our role is manageable, and that's a huge piece of self-care. It also means tending to our needs when we are dysregulated, whether that's taking a break at school, or what I like to really focus on is building things within our routines that help us take care of each other, that help us take care of ourselves, that help us regulate. So I know that swimming really helps me. So how do I build that into my schedule more so I have that in my routine? I'm building in regulation in my routine. I use a lot of essential oils for myself as part of my self-care plan, making sure that they're pure, therapeutic grade oils. I make sure I carry a water bottle and that I put lemon in it, and that I pay attention to lighting and temperature and all kinds of things like that that help me be regulated, that help me take care of me. Making sure we get plenty of sleep is a huge piece of that. So I would be remiss if we didn't focus on that just a little bit today, and remembering that no one can pour from an empty cup. We have to fill up, and we have to be able to identify what it is that fills us up in a regular way. And I don't mean how do we take a toll on our stress response system all day, every day, and then plan some kind of trip that's supposed to make us feel better. That's not really self-care. Self-care is the day by day, moment by moment. How are we taking care of ourselves so that we are in our green zones as much as possible and can be well while doing this work well. Be well while doing this work well. That's what our kids need, and that's what we need in order for us to be healthy and happy and to have something to give. As Sharon mentioned in the beginning, I would love to know what your My Miss Jen takeaway is today, whether you put it in the comments or if you tweet about it and use the hashtag, or you come on over to our Facebook page, my author page, and put your My Miss Jen takeaway there using the hashtag. I would love to see what you've learned today, and that'll help us move forward together. there is some information about the Facebook page. I have an author Facebook page. It's Miss Jen Alexander. I'm also on Twitter at Ms. Jen Alexander, capital M, capital J, capital A, no periods in that one, Ms. Jen Alexander on Twitter, and Ms.Jen Alexander on Facebook. I also want to let you know about some upcoming trainings that I will have that are open and have seats available at this time. This summer in Iowa, I will be doing an all-day level 1 training where we learn a lot about what trauma is and all the different ways that it impacts kids, and you will spend time thinking about students that you've had in the past and understanding them in a more trauma-sensitive way. We'll also talk about the mindset changes and shifts that are necessary for building a trauma-sensitive school, and begin to look at how do we help kids feel safe, be connected, get regulated, and learn. And one of the ways we'll do that in the level 1 training this summer on Monday, June 17th, is that I will spend a lot of time in the afternoon teaching you about trauma-sensitive discipline practices so that you have things that you can walk away with and put to use right away. Then on Monday, July 22nd, I'll be doing a half-day training that is only on those discipline practices. And here's why I do that. I've also been traveling the country giving presentations at various conferences, doing some keynote presentations as well, which I'm very excited about. And those tend to be shorter, and we get to everything except discipline practices. So if you've been to one of my trainings anywhere in the country but haven't attended a discipline practice, what you can do on July 22nd is come to Iowa. You might want to come the day before and attend that half-day training on trauma-sensitive discipline practices so that you're caught up with basically a full level 1 training. And then you can join us on Tuesday, July 23rd for the level 2 training, where we are really going to dive into RTI, trauma-informed RTI. I said that backwards. Trauma-informed RTI. What does that look like? What are you already doing that helps students feel safe, be connected, get regulated, and learn? And then what do you want to add in, and how can I help you add in interventions, especially in Tier 2 and Tier 3, but we're going to work on Tier 1 as well. And that will be the work of that level 2 training, which is all day. And we will tackle self-care as part of that training as well. And one of the things that I love about these summer trainings is that we are at Hartman Reserve in Cedar Falls, Iowa. It is a beautiful setting out in the woods. The building is beautiful. The view is amazing. We will take breaks out in the woods, and I will promise you that we're going to build the days in a way that helps you take care of you, and that I will help take care of you, so that you're not just going to learn a lot, because you will, and you will walk away with lots of things that you can start implementing with kids right away, but you're going to be taken care of well while we're doing it. So I really hope you will join us. Cedar Falls, Iowa is a wonderful little community. We have wonderful downtown shopping. It's an artsy, creative place. We have great eateries and things that you can do while you're here. So please consider joining us and registering for a Miss Jen summer training. And if coming to Iowa isn't something that is possible for you, especially this summer, know that I'm also scheduling trainings across the country. So email me, reach out to me. I would love to come to you and help you and your people help kids, and can tailor some trainings to exactly what you need as well. So be in touch. If nothing else, join us on Twitter, join us on Facebook. I'll be putting some other things out there for you to use, and it's really about doing this work together and sharing ideas and helping each other help kids. And I couldn't be more excited to be a leader in this movement with you. And thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you for the difference that you make every day with kids, because I know you are doing that, or you wouldn't already be here. So thank you for that. And there's my website that you can check out some information with too. So thank you so much for joining us. I'm just delighted that you have all been here, and I can't wait to go back and read all of your comments in more detail. Right now, I'm going to turn things over to Sharon.
Yes, well, thank you so much. Great job. Lots of stuff going on in the chat right now.
Awesome.
So I just want to address one thing. We do have a couple of questions to get to. A lot of people were asking about the River of Feelings and where they could download that, as well as the PowerPoint presentation. So both will be available in the webinar archives at the Teaching All Students EdWeb community. If you go there, go to Webinar Archives, click on this webinar, and you'll have access to both of those. The River of Feelings may go up later this afternoon, but it will be there. So that's where you can find both of those pieces of information. And then really quick, too, I just want to announce our winners. We have Carmen. Yeah, you get a free copy of Jen's new book. I'll be mailing them out tomorrow. Our first winner is Carmen Price Bullock from Maryland. Then we have Claudette Van Ravenstein from Texas and Brenda Nixon from Wyoming. So congratulations. And again, your books are going to be going out tomorrow. Okay, so let's just jump right in and get to a couple of questions. The first one is, can the river of feelings be used with high schoolers?
Absolutely. I have not used it with high schoolers, but what I can tell you is that the educators that I've worked with are jumping on the language and using it. And if little kids and big kids at the elementary level can use it, high school kids can use it too. I think it's very applicable. And I think that's one of the things that's really helpful about it, is that it isn't just for young kids.
Perfect. Wonderful. So are students with anxiety more likely to perceive trauma when others wouldn't see it?
Yes, and I think it goes beyond perceiving it. So if we think about anxiety, that is dysregulation inside the body. Anxiety can be associated with that pink zone. It can be associated with that red zone. So it's not just, it can be that they're more apt to perceive a threat in a situation due to the anxiety that they're feeling, but it can also be that they're feeling more overwhelmed and experiencing more of the threat. So those things go together for sure.
Okay. Mood swings. That's something that can last all day long. Any advice on how to stay ahead of them?
I think the more we can build in regulation into the day, the better. If I were to go back and teach in my BD room again, I would start my day similarly to how I used to when I was in a special education room. It was called a BD room at the time. That's not what the language that we necessarily use now. But all of my students in that self-contained classroom had difficulty with regulation, had difficulty with challenging behaviors. Many of them had a history of trauma. And I started the day in a very slow way. We ate together, we connected with each other. I always had some kind of a creative individual activity in the beginning of the day, whether it was art or drawing or writing or Play-Doh or finger paint, something that kids could do that they enjoyed, that was regulating, and that I could connect one-on-one with them before we moved into the day and kind of get a read on where they were at. And now what I would do is use that river of feelings in the morning in that same way. But we can build in regulation throughout the day with all kids, and even do more for tier 2 and tier 3. So more rhythm, more music, more connection. We have to help kids build in that regulation through those activities.
Awesome. So it looks like we have 2 more questions. What about students who have limited verbal skills?
Yes, that definitely can happen. In fact, with traumatized youth, when that stress response system is triggered, a trauma response is triggered, any of us, if we have a history of trauma, would tend to lose language. There's a lot of scientific evidence behind that Dr. Bessel van der Kolk has studied. So losing language is very common. And then we also have students, obviously, because of the disabilities that they have, may have difficulty with language anyway. And that can happen with traumatized youth as well, if we look at some of the effects that trauma can cause for kids. So what I love about the river is that you can have kids point. So point to where you think you are in the river. Oh, you think you're in the pink zone? Do you think it's a 6 or it's a 7? You don't have to start with the numbers, though. You can even start with just the 3 words, too much, just right, not enough, and not even break it down into pink or red at first. And they can point to that. And then eventually move to the color. And then eventually, if they're able, move to the number, and then start getting more words with it as you can. But you could do nonverbal cards with it. You could do picture cards with it. You could modify this in whatever way is going to work for your individual kids.
Okay. And last question, how can I get teachers and admin on board with using this in the classroom?
I think it starts with education and professional development. And the more we understand the magnitude of trauma in our schools and how trauma affects regulation, the hungrier then we all are for tools to help us with that. And I don't know of a school in the country who doesn't have teams of educators who are struggling with challenging behaviors right now. And that's dysregulation. Not all dysregulation leads to challenging behaviors, but when we see challenging behaviors, it is dysregulation. And do we all want better tools for dealing with that? Absolutely, because that's going to help us help kids learn. And I think that's the buy-in right there.
Well, thank you, Jen. And I'm sorry, everyone, there is a typo. This expires in 2019, not 2018. Yeah, Jen's book just came out, so it wouldn't have worked last year. Sorry about that. But thank you so much, Jen. Great presentation. Lots of wonderful information. The chat was completely exploding the entire time. And again, if people are interested in the slides, River of Feelings, taking the quiz, you need to just sign up for our EdWeb community, Teaching All Students, and you can find everything you need there. We would love for you to join our Teaching All Students communities for more informative webinars like the one we just had, and resources and downloads and lots of great goodies. So thank you again, Jen. You did a fantastic job.
Oh, thank you. This was so much fun.
Yes, I'm sure your Facebook and Twitter are going to have lots and lots of comments. But,
great.
And thank you, everyone, for taking time out of your day to join us. And I hope we will see you all at the next Teaching All Students webinar. Have a great one.
Good. Thanks, everybody.